Anyone who's tried to live out their faith knows that eventually you encounter what I'll call gently today a rough patch, right? It's a negative experience in our lives that causes us to really question either God's existence or at least God's interest in our lives. That's what I want to talk about today. Hey, my name's Brad, and I am a Jesus follower. I'm a millennial. I'm a pastor. I'm a husband, a father, lots of other stuff. But my heart for this YouTube channel is to bring up the questions that we all have about our faith and about a God that can be really hard to understand sometimes. I'm really grateful that you're watching. If you like this content, please like it, please subscribe, and even share it with your friends. Let's dive in. All right, today we're talking about let it develop. Let it develop. And remember those rough patches I was just talking about, the negative experiences that we walk through. I think that those things cause us to at least question two things about God. When we go through something that we just don't understand, why would God let me walk through this? Or why didn't God fix this or stop this from happening? So when we go through stuff like that, we question two things about God, at least two things: God's goodness and God's greatness. And let me explain what I mean. When we question God's goodness, we ask questions like this: if God was really good, why wouldn't he stop that from happening? Why wouldn't he fix that right away? Why wouldn't he do something about that, right? And we go through different experiences. We just can't wrap our minds around it. Why did God let that happen to me? Why did God let that happen to the person that I care about, that I'm watching go through this intense struggle? And we question God's goodness. The other thing we question is God's greatness. And maybe we think like, well, maybe God does care, but if he does care, he must be too weak to fix it, or too distracted, or he wasn't paying attention to what's going on in my life. And it causes us to really be disrupted. And I want to say today, what if I told you God's not so interested in our approval rating of what he's doing or how he's doing it? God's more interested in us getting everything we need to grow and become the person that he created us to be. And sometimes that takes a lot of positives, and sometimes part of the ingredient is some negatives too. And to kind of illustrate this, I was thinking about this idea of old school photography. And I don't have a ton of personal experience, but I have some friends who do, and I did a little research, and it's pretty neat. In old school photography, you've got a dark room, you've got an enlarger, which is kind of like a slide projector that projects light through a negative image from your camera onto photographic paper that's in this kind of special solution that helps the photographic paper receive the image and develop and turn into what they call a positive photographic image. And so it's really interesting. You have light shining through a negative, resulting in a positive. Isn't that pretty cool? And I think we have the same thing, same kind of dynamic going on in our lives, where we're encountering negatives, but if God shines his light through the negative that we're going through, it can still turn into a positive. You know, in our lives, God can take our negatives and still make a beautiful picture out of it. And in fact, the Bible doesn't promise that God's going to remove those things from our lives or take us out of those situations. There are a lot more promises in Scripture that say that God will be with us in the middle of our storms. In fact, there's a promise in Scripture that says God can take anything we're going through and work it out for our good in the end. And I think that's really powerful. I heard a quote from Pastor Stephen Furtick at Elevation Church one time that I really loved. He said, "We live in an Instagram generation, but we serve a darkroom God, and he specializes in our negatives." I love that. I love that, because when God's light shines through my negative, it can still become a positive. And in Hebrews 12, we see something really cool. It says, "Endure hardships as discipline. God is treating you as his children. For what children are not disciplined by their father? If you are not disciplined, and everyone undergoes discipline, then you are not legitimate, not true sons and daughters at all. Moreover, we have all had human fathers who disciplined us, and we respected them for it. How much more should we submit to the Father of our spirits and live? They, our human fathers, disciplined us for a little while as they thought best, but God disciplines us for our good, in order that we may share in his holiness. No discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful. But later on, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained by it." Now listen, I want to be really, really clear in this video. I am not suggesting that God takes that cancer or that car accident or whatever that negative experience might be that's coming to your mind today, and God is in some sick cosmic way disciplining us with that thing. That's not what I'm talking about today. What I'm talking about is our perception of life being hard sometimes is not always something that we shouldn't go through. Sometimes it's something that God can use, and it's creating discipline in us. And that's why God, I think, loves to be seen as a father, because he's a father walking through those situations with us, working it out to our good. And just like this section says, in the end, there will be a harvest of righteousness and peace. And I believe lots of other things in our lives if we allow ourselves to be trained by the rough patches that we go through. Maybe it's too hard for you to think about God as a father because of your experience with fathers, human fathers. Let me maybe give us a different word here that I think applies in the same way. What if you thought of God like a great coach? And if you were in any kind of sports or academics and you were coached in any way, you know that a coach pushes people beyond their comfort into things that sometimes are really difficult, sometimes things that even hurt physically. And I'm thinking of in athletics and sports, your coach will push you to work out to get stronger, and it might hurt at the time, and you can't wait for the workout to be over. But you're so happy later when you're in the competition or in the real game experience. You're so happy the coach pushed you to experience that, even though it felt hard at the time. It's something that resulted in really great results later on. I think God does the same thing in our lives. When he shines his light through the negative, it results in something positive. I hope that encourages you today and maybe makes it a little bit easier to deal with the questions that you still have about a God that's really hard to understand. But if you really enjoyed this content, or if you felt like it'd be beneficial to someone else, please like it, subscribe, and share it. It would mean a lot to me. I'd be really grateful. I can't wait to be together again.